Hello and welcome back to the Relevate video training series. In this module, we're going to be talking about sales conversion rates and how we can improve them. So a sales conversion is where you've started the sales conversation and you get to a point where your customer is ready to buy. Now, a conversion is when they actually buy. So going through the sales process is a little bit devaluing or frustrating if you don't get to that actual moment where they pull their wallet out or their credit card and then they pay for the thing. So a conversion is part of the sales process. Now, if you're doing your marketing correctly, you're doing your sales correctly, then you've got a lot more in the pipeline. And so by having a lot of people in the pipeline, that's really, really good. Now you need to work on your sales conversion percentage. So that is the number of people in your pipeline that you're actually closing. Now, if you're doing a really good job at marketing, your sales conversion rate will decrease. And that is because you're going to have more people in the pipeline. If you have a 100% close rate, you are not marketing enough. If you have a 50% close rate, you are not marketing enough. You really need to get in front of a lot more people, get those leads in the door, start those sales conversations so that the close rate percentage, although it might be 1 or 2% or 3%, is 3% of 1,000, or that 3% is worth a whole lot more because you're only taking the cream of the crop, the best opportunities that are coming through your pipeline. So you've got a lot of leads coming in, a lot of interest in your brand. You have a first level qualification where you get rid of those people that are not a good fit for you. Then you have a cycle where you go through and educate the customer. This is what we do. Some people will fall off and they'll say, you're too expensive, you're not right for me, this isn't the right time. Then you get to another phase where you go through that contract negotiation phase and maybe they're really interested and some people won't close because something in the deal wasn't right for them or something changed along the way. Maybe the phone rang. If they're in an e-commerce process, abandoned cart emails are very significant for increasing the amount of sales because something happened. Card didn't work, baby cried, call came in, and they didn't complete the transaction. So your conversion rate can be increased by just sending a reminder email after the fact. Now that's in an e-commerce perspective, but if you're doing in a face-to-face selling or in a services-based selling, it could just be that they got distracted with a phone call or something else was happening in their business that they needed to deal with. So sometimes people will fall off for contract reasons, price reasons, deal structure reasons, or just something else came up. Now, that doesn't mean that all of your closed lost opportunities are bad. Sometimes they can come back around. Go and call them again. Find them 3 months, 6 months later. Give them a call and say, hey, it's been a while. Were you still interested? Because if they got through your sales process, they've probably evaluated you, come to some level of understanding of you, some level of trust, and they might come back. Maybe they tried someone else cheaper and it didn't work out. And so now you're contacting them and they're like, oh, thank goodness you called. Now is the perfect time. Let's go ahead. So dead deals aren't dead deals necessarily. So sometimes that is really just the course of life happens. Life gets in the way. And your conversion rate will actually increase if you go back and engage those contacts that maybe weren't interested at the time. So conversion rate is the number of people that are in your pipeline that actually convert to sales. So it's one thing in a long chain of things that you need to get right. You need to get your marketing right. You need to get your qualification right. You need to get your sales process down pat. And then your conversion rate is the bit when you ask for the sale and then they sign on the dotted line and hand you the cash. So that is the point at which you're converting all of the efforts leading up to that date. So of course it makes sense that you need an efficient marketing process, you need an efficient sales process, and you need to maximize your conversions. That being said, the more you get in the door, the more you qualify out the wrong ones, the more likely you are to have a high number of good quality, ready to go customers. So it is a little bit of a hard metric to measure because yes, if you're marketing more, your conversion rate will go down. But maybe that might say something about your marketing targeting. Maybe you're not targeting the right kind of lead. Maybe you're not qualifying them enough early on. So it's really only an indication. It's not a black and white measure of go or no go, good or bad. So one thing that you need to do in order to determine how good your end conversion rate is map out your process. Don't completely go and change and reinvent the wheel every time you decide that sales aren't working. You need to create a process and stick to it. Only when you have the data, you need to approach this like a scientist. Only when you have the data can you really go through and refine things. And when I say refine things, I mean one thing at a time. Don't go changing 50 things, because you need to have enough coming through. You make one tweak, it goes up or it goes down. If it goes up when there's a positive improvement, continue doing that thing, work on something else. So if you constantly change, or if you change 5 things in the chain, could be we sent an email here, we did a phone call there, we did a face-to-face meeting somewhere, or we sent some SMS notification. If you keep changing it, you're never really going to know what worked. Or maybe you had one thing that you changed that worked really well, and then you had something else which actually took you backwards. And so your sales change was the same, or your conversion rate was the same. But again, like you're also dealing with different people closing at different times of the year affecting your conversion rates as well. So you have to be very, very, closely looking at it. Like, it's not an exact science. It is a little bit of like a test and see. What you are doing is statistical improvement. So if I change this one thing, we get 10% more close rate, then yes, that's a large number. Now, your conversion rate, I should qualify that as to say that if you had 100 leads come in the door and you converted 3 of them, you have a 3% close rate. If you have 100 people come through the door and now you're closing 6 of them, you have a 6% close rate, but you have improved your close rate conversion by 100%. You have doubled what the previous number was. So, yes, it gets a little bit confusing, but I think you follow me now, where we're trying to make incremental improvements. You're no way are you going to make some change and then have 100 leads become 100 customers. It's impossible. And in fact, if that is possible, as I said earlier, you're not marketing enough, and you need to be getting 2, 3, 4, 500 leads through the door to make that possible, because then it means that the 100 that you do get through are actually better for you. They're the leads that you have handpicked out of having too many leads. That's the goal. You want to be marketing so that you've got so many leads coming through the door, and you're picking up the phone and you're going through a process, and that process is highly structured. And that process, whilst being highly structured, can be incrementally changed over time. What that does is 2 things. One, you know what your conversion rate can be improved by, because you are doing the thing, seeing the effect, and then locking in that change, and then doing the next thing, seeing the effect, and then making a decision. Well, that actually took us backwards. Let's go back to what we were doing before. So the other thing it does is having a structured sales process allows you to delegate it and scale it and build more depth into it. So if I know that I get this email and that email really closes the deal, then maybe I might improve the email, make it look better, maybe add some video, add some content. But again, that's one thing that you want to test. Now you've got gross movements and you've got fine movements. A gross movement is one big change and then see where it lands. And a fine movement is a minor tweak. So it might be that the gross movement is we're going to send an email 30 seconds after they fill out a contact form. And then the fine movement might be you play with the subject line of that email. So in the first instance, you may not have had a follow-up mechanism at a particular point in the journey. Now you do. In the second instance, you are just now modifying the finer points of that. So maybe there's a button on there and the button was red before and that didn't convert as well as a green button. Definitely do not spend time going to those fine changes first. You really need to be making the right big complex changes before you even bother going any further. So the easiest way to create a flowchart on your sales process is to work from the inside out. Work from the customers that you already have. Think about what were the last few steps before they closed. So you're doing it from the point where they signed off on the deal, and then you're going, what happened before that? what happened before that, what happened before that. Because you're kind of working from the information that you have, the things that you know. If you don't know what to do at the start of a conversation or at the start of the marketing journey, it's really, really hard for you to figure that out and to put it into a workflow because you just haven't tested it yet. So maybe have a conversation to your customer. What did you see that made you convert? Was it an ad? Did you listen to something on the radio? Did you fill out a form? What was the thing? Maybe you know the form thing, but what was the thing that you did before you reached out to us? Where did they find you? That helps to do the front end marketing piece. But for the sales conversation, if you start from what you know, you start from the middle or the core of the customer relationship and work backwards or work outwards from there. That will really help you to build a workflow diagram chart that will allow you to kind of lock your sales process into a point in time, and from that you can build on it. Now, diagramming out your process is one thing, but one of the best things that you can do to actually practically put your workflow diagram into a system is to use a CRM. A CRM allows you to capture the information, track the process, keep the notes, and drive it through to completion. It also helps you understand what happens at each stage. You can create a process built into the system. Using the right system, you can create timers on when things are supposed to happen by. If the customer hasn't called you back by a particular time, follow them up. Make sure that your sales teams are attempting to call at least 3, 4, or 5 times before they give up on a lead. Make sure that that lead is getting worked down that particular pipeline, and at all points in the process what stage they're at. And at the very least, having a system baked into a CRM or something like that gives you structure around your process allows you to delegate it, but it also allows you to measure it a lot more. So you can pull analytics and statistics out of your CRM, such as what time they spent at each phase, how long it takes them to go from part A to part B in your sales process. And maybe if you understand where the bottlenecks are, you'll be able to roll out new ideas or new components or information or changes to your sales process to make it faster. So as long as you are effectively making sales and you have the process documented, now you can work on the bit that's holding you up the most. If you could do everything, you'll do nothing. So the best thing is to have something that'll tell you where the weakest point is, and that's what you should fix first. One of the easiest things to fix in the sales process is providing information. Half the time your customer is looking to solve a problem. They're looking for information on whether your product or service is going to solve that problem. So it's really easy to identify the questions that the customer has and try to answer them before they pick up the phone. Do it in your marketing, do it in your initial outreach, do it with flyers, do it with bits of content, videos, etc., that are going to help answer and kill off buyer objection before the customer even gets to you. So if they're wondering, why does it cost that much? Maybe a video might talk about the effort that you go to, the skill that you have, the education that your team has, the quality of the materials that you use. That can help to signal a level of value so that if anyone is sensitive about that, they might exit the sales process early themselves without your team having to pick up the phone. That means that you've got more time to spend on the people that matter rather than spending all the time on the people that don't. Now, flyers and materials you can send out even if the client doesn't necessarily ask. For example, if they fill out a contact form, you can send an automatic reply with your capability statement. A capability statement is a document that says, this is what we're about, this is what we do, and it doesn't necessarily tell the client what they're specifically trying to achieve. It tells them what you're able to do, which might also expand the conversation later on. So you might say, yes, you've contacted us about service A, but we also do service B, C, and D, and here are all the people that we've worked with that are happy with us, etc. So by providing that information and context, you might go from a sales conversation that starts small but ends up quite large because they realize the breadth of services that you can provide. Providing information for the customer is one thing. Providing information for the sales teams is another. So you can easily provide a list of common questions and the responses to help overcome those objections. So it might be, you're too expensive. Well, we go to this effort and we have this education and we have these things. Or maybe the objection is that they're worried about how long it's going to take. Well, yes, it might take a period of time, but we have, structured resources and structured processes, and we have to get, whatever clearances. So like if you're going to build a house, okay, you might have some form of permit to acquire. And so building of the house may not be able to be done in a particular time frame, but at least if you answer that question, it might be out of their control, might be out of your control, but by answering the question and doing it intelligently, you might help yourself along the sales process by being the one that provides the most information. And by providing guides and documentation to your sales team, you actually empower them to be able to answer the customer more succinctly, faster, without having to go and research it or get back to them. Ideally, this is in a database that they can quickly search up and find the answer to without it being a really complicated process of going and asking and then getting that answer, but then you've only answered one salesperson. What if you have 20? So you understand the scalability of having your process documented. Another common way to improve the sales process is really just to understand what your customer wants. Have a questionnaire. Are you asking the right questions of your customer? I have a 10-step questionnaire that my sales administrator does on the first 5 minutes after we've got the lead. As soon as possible, as soon as the lead comes in the door, their job is to call and to get contact as fast as possible and just go through a series of questions. Tell me about your business. How big are you? What are you looking to achieve? Who would be the right person to connect you within our business? Because we have different service lines. So instead of saying, hey, let's meet about everything, what we're trying to do is say, let's get you with the right person for your needs. It might be a couple of team members, but the point is that you're making their time more efficient by having a quick 5 or 10 minute call and really understanding what the customer wants. That'll accelerate your customer journey. It will reduce the bottlenecks and make sure that their time is best used and yours as well. So using these little tips, these little touch points, it just really helps the customer have confidence that you know exactly what they want and what they're trying to achieve. And then they're going to be confident in their mind that you are the person to help them, or you are the company to help them get the outcome that they're looking for. Remember that your customer is there to solve a problem, not to get a feature or to work with you. Another thing you can try is to look at how you de-risk the purchase for your customer. Most people, when they buy from you, they're trying to justify in their mind, is this the right thing? And am I doing the right process? Am I doing all the right things to get what I want at the end of the day, get the solution? If I put money on this, is it going to go bad and then have it be a risk? So you can de-risk the solution by doing a number of things. So one way to de-risk is to offer customer references. If it's relevant to you, you can give the phone number of a couple of customers that have worked with you that can tell the other customer what it's been like, particularly if you run a service business where it's really, really hard for someone to see the product, test the product, try it. It's something that can only be experienced once. And so they're going to rely on the evidence and the information of other people and their experiences. That's why things like Google reviews work, or third-party testimonials or case studies. So by putting them in touch with your customer is even better again, because now they can ask their own questions and validate whether or not that case study was real and whether it's valuable to them in their context. Other things you can try are things like money back guarantees or other kinds of de-risk. So it might be a way that it's paid for, or it might be a way that the service is delivered, or you might try a small project before you go for the big project. But that de-risking is a very core element to be able to sell something and give confidence to the buyer that what they're spending their money on is the right thing. And that's going to improve your conversion rates. The sooner that you can introduce that into the conversation, the better. Now, I mentioned providing information before, such as a capability statement, but other things that can really help are what's called sell sheets. It's basically a product flyer or a service flyer. Now, you've probably got a number of services or a number of products, and so to have a piece of information on that, like when you go to an e-commerce store, the product has the description, it has the specifications, might be the size, the weight, the aperture, the lighting, whatever it is, what's relevant to that product. And in a service, you can do the same. You can say, this is the service that we provide. These are the usual applications for that service. These are the typical customers that we have, the people that have had benefits from consuming our service, and maybe the logos or the testimonial customers that have used your service, even better if they're some big names. And that then provides you with the evidence that you're trying to convey in a conversation. But because it's written down, that means that you can share that without it costing you an hour worth of conversation time or costing them an hour worth of time. So it could be that maybe the customer in that first call has demonstrated an interest in service line A, B, and C. Then you can send them those flyers or those sell sheets with a bit of information to say, glad you're interested in those three things. We'll book you in with a specialist that can answer your questions. And here is some more information before you get into that meeting so that when you have that meeting, you've got a better conversation. You know exactly what it is that you're talking, or they know exactly what it is that you're trying to sell them, the features, the benefits, all of those sorts of things, even if they don't read it. You know, a lot of times I talk to people and they say, hey, I don't think anybody's going to read this thing. It doesn't matter. Your customer, if they have the opportunity to research and find out and de-risk, are probably going to read it. If it's there and they don't read it, you've lost nothing. If it's not there and they want to know this information, you've lost a customer. So it's better to have these sorts of sell sheets, these sorts of emails, your capability statement, than to not have it, because some people are very inquisitive and they want to know more. And there's nothing better than having your questions answered automatically before you get into the sales conversation. Obviously, you need to be very careful about how you do this. You don't want to give them something really, really confusing. You want to boil it down to just the essential chunks of information that are relevant to what they're trying to do with you or what they're trying to buy. So by doing that, you're giving them, you're drip feeding information, you're providing information before they've asked the question, and you're killing off buyer objection before they get to the point of sale. When they get to the point of sale, there's a lot less reasons for them to say no, and so they're more likely to say yes, and so your conversion rate is higher. Another way to increase your conversion rate is to make buying easy. A lot of times people have very complex order forms, lengthy processes, but the more you can simplify and the faster you can enable that person to make a decision. Click here, sign there, put your credit card in, and let's go. You know, that could be a very simple process. Instead, you know, quite often I hear someone has to call the office, and then when they call the office, they get the receptionist who then books them in with a salesperson. To some extent, that makes sense. But like if someone's at the point of sale and they're trying to buy, added things don't make it easy. You know, maybe then there's a quotation, and the quotation is signed and returned. And then once it's returned, then an order form is raised and that's sent to the customer. And then they have to sign that. And then once the order form is raised, then it goes back. Now, I get it when those sales are high dollar value and you need those checks and balances, you need those approval steps. But in some circumstances, you might make a call and say, if it's below this value, I'm not going to bother writing a proposal. You know, there's no point spending 3 hours writing a proposal to sell 2 hours worth of time, or 1 hour worth of, or even 3 hours worth of, or even 5 hours worth of time. There's not enough value in the deal to equate to the amount of sell time to return that dollar value back to you for the time you invested in trying to acquire that customer or to close that customer. So you need to make your sales process efficient. You need to provide as much information, and maybe it could just be a quick quote in an email, or it could be, hey, here's the terms of what we're proposing. Would you like to go ahead? Yes or no? So we actually say if it's less than $5,000 in our business, it's just an email. If it's 5 to 10, we might do a quote document. And if it's 10 or more, we're going to do a proposal. And even then, if we're going to do a proposal, we have proposal templates once it's up to about 30, 35 grand. And then anything more than that, we're going to do a very custom, very detailed, very personalized proposal. But only at that point does it make it worth spending 5-10 hours writing a really nice proposal. Because otherwise you're spending a lot of time writing proposals and not a lot of time actually doing the sale or actually making the money. So yes, you improve your conversion rates by having all this stuff pre-prepared And it's easier to sell something that is fixed rather than something that is constantly changing. So if you are doing something custom, make sure it's worth it. If you are doing a service that's repeatable, make it as systemized as you can and you will make money. Another area where a lot of sales fall down in the conversion side is that sometimes the price is a shock to the customer. Now, I think sometimes you can signal along the way a little bit about what the price might be, particularly if you show them packages, like here's package A, B, or C, the gold, the silver, the bronze. And those can have prices associated. And you can say, look, these are our typical packages, but let's talk a little bit more about what you specifically need, because you don't want to necessarily have them choose and then get the wrong package. Maybe the silver or the bronze one is too little for them. Maybe the gold one is too much for them. And if you give them the wrong package, yes, you want them to spend more, but if you give them the wrong package and they have a bad experience, it's going to affect negatively on your brand. So you should always be trying to right-size the solution for the customer. If you provide a service where you have a good, better, best package, it's really easy for you to demonstrate price. If you want to demonstrate price or somewhat demonstrate price in the lead up, you can say, look, many of our clients say spend between this much and that much. And that can give them an indication of price. Obviously, it's a little bit of a game of chess. You want them to reveal their price. But sometimes it's good to give them a little bit of a shock to the system to say, and I mean early on, give them a shock to the system to say, if this is not for you, walk away now, because it's going to waste your time and mine. But most people that get this service spend between $20,000 and $30,000, and we still need to work out specifically what you are requiring. So it kind of gives a bit of a price signaling. It gets them ready for what the price actually is, and then you need to demonstrate the value from there. But if you just go straight to, it's not that expensive, it's going to be easy enough for you to afford, and by the way, it's $20,000. They might have in their head been expecting $1,000 or $2,000 or something ridiculously cheap. But if you spend 20 hours in the sales process over a number of weeks or months, you've wasted all that time. So it's better to filter them out as early as possible and get to a position where when you do make that price declaration that this is how much it is, now they're not scared off. They're not shocked. They were kind of expecting something at that rate. And now you've demonstrated value along the way so that when you get to that price demonstration or that price declaration, that it's justified. If you purely sent price out as the comparison, they're probably going to find 10 people cheaper or more. The problem with that is that they've not compared you based on the output or the inputs or the quality of the process. So you need to demonstrate that value before you really just go and give them the final price. But you should definitely say, look, we're in this realm and this is why. This is more likely to improve your conversion rates because people, when they get that price, they were kind of already expecting it. And that expectation management has been handled more effectively. One of the best ways to improve your conversion is to be invested in the customer's outcome. You're not just selling them a widget, you're not just taking an order, but you're understanding what it is that they're trying to achieve. And by doing that, they feel as though, again, you've de-risked them, that maybe the price and the product and the service has been right-sized for them, and you've asked them enough questions and you've listened to them enough that they are now ready to receive that information. And they kind of trust you as an advisor or as someone who is helping them to solve a problem or get to the end outcome solution. Sometimes they need to be guided on what the solution actually is and what the ideal outcome could be, because sometimes their idea of what the outcome could be is not as good as what you think it could be, given your experience, having given your solution to as many customers as possible. So in my scenario as a consultant on CRM, the outcome that the customer could have is a lot better than what they really understand, because they just don't know. They just think of CRM as a system, but realistically, 90% of the benefits are outside of the CRM. There's productivity gains, there's information gains, there's better employee engagement. There's things that are very hard to measure. So sometimes if you can communicate that effectively to your customer that, hey, there's a little bit more to this and you're going to get a lot more than what you think you're going to get because of the way we go about this. There's a life-changing result at the end, or there's a business-changing result, or there's a, situation-changing result. then that's going to increase the value of the transaction. And so you want the value to be perceived so high that the price just makes sense. If they're trying to compare you to somebody else, well, then they're just going to compare you on the price. So you need to change what their actual comparison measure is. Quite often people that spend less money on their CRM implementation often end up having to do it twice or three times, or they're not as competitive as somebody else who's done a little bit more of an investment. And I'm not saying price is the only indicator. I'm saying the outcome and the approach is more important than the price. And whilst conversion rate is one thing, if you can create an ongoing customer, you have a much more powerful outcome. So creating an action plan. So maybe there's if it's a high ticket sale, if you've got a large consulting component that you need to do, then the upfront might be the small project you need to get them over the line. And then the next part is something that needs to be done in phases. But if it's such a big transformation, if it's such a massive change, then that's not something you could do in one go. And so maybe they can't afford it all in one go, or maybe they need to do the first part to prepare them for the next part, and so on. And by creating a structured process or a roadmap, then you've got a much better way of promoting that idea to the client that they can get the outcome they want, even if it doesn't all happen straight away. You've given them a strategy, you've given them the steps, you've given them the action plan, and now you're just taking one step with them and seeing where they go. And that first step helps them set them up for the second step, and then the third step, and then the fourth step, and so on. So the action plan really helps you to give the customer confidence that you're on their journey with them for the success and for the long term. Now, just to reiterate a point that I made earlier about following up. Now, not only is your closed lost opportunities gold, but sometimes people get stuck. They just stop communicating, or they go on hold, or they go, we're not ready yet, we'll come back to us. And so they end up being on hold forever, what seems like. And so a lot of times people give up after the first contact attempt. I think something like 46% of sales reps or business owners give up after the first follow-up attempt. And so they miss so much opportunity, because then, you get 26% give up after 2 attempts, but effectively only 8% of people get to the 5th follow-up attempt or more. And those sales reps and those business owners enjoy 83% of the sales, as compared to anyone else who's just doing 1 attempt or 2 attempts. So you need to be following up. Someone has got priorities more than just the conversation with you. You're busy running your business, they're busy running theirs, or living their everyday life. And so by being in touch on a regular basis, and it doesn't have to be pushy, it could be just, hey, how you going? Just checking in with you. Just wanted to see what's up. What's new with you? How are things going? Were you still in the market for this? They could be a very gentle question. It doesn't have to be pushy. It doesn't have to be sleazy. It could be very nice and friendly. Maybe you write down something about them and say, hey, how did your kids' soccer go? Or something like that. So having a conversation, try to be a little bit more human. But then obviously by being in touch with them on a regular basis, now you're starting to create familiarity, and they're starting to feel like they know you. And so that reduces the risk, because you're kind of invested in their outcome or their future. And so without it being pushy, like I think if you frame it wrong, you can go really bad with this. So one example of pushy and wrong is where, we work with a software platform, and those platforms have partner managers who work with us to try and, get the client over the line. This particular partner manager called the customer direct and said, can you close this month because I've got sales targets to meet? Now, not only is that incredibly disrespectful, like who cares about their sales targets? At the end of the day, it's about the customer and their business and their needs. We're not too pushy. We kind of have goals. They say, you know what, we've got this challenge on. We just need to deal with that for the next 2 weeks. Get in touch with us after that. And so we respect that. We put that in the notes and we say, follow up in 2 weeks and 3 days and check in with them and see how they're going. How did that project go? Oh, yeah, we're still busy with this. Okay, no worries. When can we get in touch next? Give us another week. Okay, great. Then we call them in that week. We don't call them every 2 days and go, have you closed yet? Have you closed yet? That's just rude. That's just ignorant. So understanding where the customer's at, kind of modifying the process to meet them where they're at. But, don't ignore them. Keep following up. You will get there. Just keep following up. but do it in a human-friendly, positive way. You could also look to incentivize your sales conversions in a particular way. So say, for example, you've been following a customer up for a period of time and you happen to be in a little bit of a slow period. And then you could call up your customers and say, hey, look, we've got a little bit of a lag period. So if you close in the next couple of days, I can actually get your project through a lot faster than it would normally go. And if you've got downtime, you might consider downtime pricing. So sometimes you might want to give them an opportunity to take advantage and say, I can give you a 5% discount if you close by the end of the week because we've got this slow period that we need to fill. That keeps your team busy, it keeps your customer happy, and at the end of the day, you've got a higher close rate percentage. Now, in saying that, I am not an advocate of discounting. You should not be discounting if there is no reason to do so. If it's a bit more of a sort of a fair thing to say, like we've got people here, it would actually help us a lot if we could keep them busy instead of laying them off or, sending them on leave or something like that, then yes, it kind of makes sense to keep the lights on, keep things running, keep things burning. But if there's no reason to discount, you could frame it another way. You could just say, we've got downtime, we can get your project done faster. Would you like to take advantage of that now? And then if the customer says yes, then great, you've not had to discount, but you've still been able to fill your quiet time. Now, as you start to scale, one of the last and best things that you can do is train your sales team. You've probably got all the other things in place. You've probably been running for a while. You know what works, you know what doesn't. But until you train your sales team, they're never going to be able to sell as effectively as you, or they're never going to know the system as well as you. So if you spend the time going through scenarios, going through questions and answers, going through all of the sales materials, help them find where to get things, where to get information, what email to send at what stage, what flyer to provide when. And by providing this information to the salesperson, you reduce the friction, you increase their speed, you increase their awareness of objections and allow them to get more done without you being involved. And that creates scalability that you would just not get if you were trying to throw people at the problem, because if they don't know what the process is or they haven't been able to test what works, they've gone from day one again. And so they're trying to figure out what the customer wants, what the answers are to the questions. But by showing them the process, you enable them to rapidly accelerate and absorb the process into themselves so that they can do it naturally every day without having to constantly consult the system. But you can also build your system in such a way that it is like a follow the bouncing ball kind of thing. So if you've ever seen music videos for kids and they've got the words on the screen and they've got this little bouncing ball that tells you what word to sing, same in like karaoke. Follow the bouncing ball. It is really hard to get wrong. You can kind of follow the tune. You can say the word when the ball lands on the word, and you know what to do next. Even if you do it scrappily for the first time, the next time is going to be easier and easier and easier until you can do it without having to look at the bouncing ball on the screen. So by having a system, you give your sales teams a structure and a process to follow. Yes, there's some human elements and some skill in and amongst that, but for the most part, they've got the 80% and then they can refine the final 20%. So that has been today's lesson on improving conversion rates. And if you put all of those things in place, progressively over time or all in one hit, you're going to improve your conversion. Of course, you need the marketing, you need the sales process. The conversion's the final step. But the conversion is driven by all of the things that happened before it. So by understanding your conversion rate and understanding all of the steps in the sales process, you can unblock your sales to increase, maybe even double your sales or triple. Just depends on where your starting point is and what your maximum capacity for improvement is and how much you are driven to actually make those changes. So thank you very much for watching. Please keep an eye out for the next lesson.